All right, Bernie Sanders continuing to speak there in Colorado in front of a crowd of thousands at the University of Colorado East Campus. Just moments ago, though, he spoke at length about gun control and legislation in this country. Listen.
And prayers after mass killings. We have a hard time understanding how people can walk on a
Heather, how
campus
long is this?
or into a schoolroom or into a movie theater and take out a gun and kill and kill and kill. Condolences and prayers are not enough. We have got to do something meaningful to address this crisis. Gun violence in our country, as everybody here knows, is a very serious issue and one which, tragically, Colorado is all too familiar with. The attacks in Columbine and Aurora have put your state on the map nationally in a way that I know you did not want to happen. Now, I am not going to stand before you today and tell you that there are easy answers to this crisis, either from a public policy point of view or from a political point of view. Because if I told you that, I would not be telling you the truth. But the fact is that there is a different way that we can address this issue. And that is that instead of people yelling at each other, we have got to come together on common sense approaches, which in fact the vast majority of the American people support.
All right, you heard Bernie Sanders there speaking about gun control and different legislative measures put forth. We should note, in the wake of the Oregon mass shooting, all 14 of those guns linked to the shooter were legally purchased by the shooter or by his family members. Officials tell us here at CNN that family members told investigators the 26-year-old gunman suffered mental health issues. Current laws on mental illness and gun ownership are very complicated, and they contain many exemptions. Let's compare the laws and the reality when it comes to mental health and guns. Attorney and CNN legal analyst Danny Tavalis penned a fascinating op-ed on it this week. He joins me now. Matthew Horace is also with us, a former ATF executive. Danny, to you first. How often are people mentally ill but not, quote-unquote, adjudicated mentally ill, and therefore they fall through the loophole and they can buy as many guns as they want?
This is a very small category when you consider the gigantic universe of people who have some form of mental illness. And we have to remember, the American Psychological Association has conducted studies and said that the vast majority, and I quote, vast majority of people with mental illness are nonviolent. So this creates a real problem in crafting legislation that surgically hones in on the people who are likely to be violent, but based on mental illness, which again, the numbers show that the vast majority may not be violent, but the problem is, what about the ones who are?
To you, Matthew, this statute, as it stands now, excludes anyone who voluntarily commits themselves to get help. And I understand that from the perspective of you want people to go get help, right? You don't want them to feel like maybe they shouldn't because they won't be allowed to do things or their guns will get taken away. But should it be the case that if you're voluntarily committed, then this doesn't apply to you?
Well, I may feel like it shouldn't be the case, but I think we're up against too much opposition from different sides of the aisle. People don't have any incentive to answer the form truthfully at this point.
Let's talk about that form. I want to pull it up because, Matthew, you bring up this ATF form 4473. And there is a question on there. This is the question that is asked, right, if you're trying to buy a gun. Have you ever been adjudicated mentally defective, which includes a determination by a court, board, commission, or other lawful authority that you are a danger to yourself or to others, or are incompetent to manage your own affairs, or have ever been committed to a mental institution. It seems pretty comprehensive. You say it's woefully inadequate. Why?
Well, it's inadequate because, as Danny said, it only represents a very small portion of the universe. If you look at the numbers of people that suffer from mental illness, both serious mental illness and not so serious, they far exceed the numbers of people that actually fall into that category. And their option is to answer the question truthfully or not. If they answer it not truthfully, they don't get the gun and they can't commit the act. If they answer it truthfully, they don't get the gun. So, what choice do we have?
Danny, there's this, you bring up in the op-ed, fascinating key 1997 Supreme Court decision, really at the heart of this. What is that?
The case is Prince v. United States, but there's the general constitutional idea that the federal government cannot force the states to enforce federal government policy. Now, why does that matter? In the case of guns, this database that we're talking about, where we supposedly store mental illness information, the NICS, is a federal database run by the FBI. That database is only as powerful as the information in it, and it relies on the 50 states to provide that information because they all have the discretion to do so if they want to or not at all. The result is a patchwork form of reporting. So again, that database may have some names in it. It may not have all the names.
And as you noted, a lot of what's in the database are paper files, et cetera, that, are not all digital and certainly not all in one place.
The government is rarely the first adapter of technology, so there are many paper files.
Wow. Danny Cevallos, thank you very much. You can look at Danny's op-ed on CNN.com. Matthew Horace, to you as well. Appreciate it.